Kirk Douglas wasn't just another star in Hollywood's golden age. He was one of its fiercest competitors, a man whose ambition could fill a room before he even spoke a word. With his chiseled jaw, piercing stare, and an intensity that radiated both on and off the screen, Douglas became a symbol of determination in an industry where compromise was often the easiest path forward. But Douglas rarely compromised. He approached acting like combat, disciplined, deliberate, and ruthless in his pursuit of greatness. That made him unforgettable to audiences, but it also made him difficult to work with. Throughout his long career, Douglas clashed with colleagues who didn't share his values or who threatened his sense of dominance. Some of those conflicts were quiet, others were explosive, but together they paint a portrait of a man who fought just as hard behind the camera as he did in front of it. And among those rivals, few stand out more than Frank Sinatra and Burt Lancaster, two men who embodied very different challenges to Douglas's vision of what Hollywood should be. Frank Sinatra, the crooner versus the craftsman. Frank Sinatra was the epitome of casual charisma. Known as Old Blue Eyes, he could silence a crowd with a song and win over an audience with a smile. His world revolved around nightclubs, parties, and a glittering social circle that included Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, the Rat Pack. They were rowdy, glamorous, and effortlessly charming. Kirk Douglas, on the other hand, came from the stage tradition. He studied acting seriously, rehearsed meticulously, and treated film as a craft that required discipline. He was blunt, serious, and didn't waste time with frivolities. The difference between them was like night and day, and it showed whenever they shared a room. Social divide. Hollywood insiders often whispered about the coldness between Sinatra and Douglas at parties. Sinatra would be cracking jokes, holding a drink, and entertaining the room, while Douglas stood nearby, stiff and disapproving. Rat Pack members teased Douglas, calling him the professor for his seriousness. Sinatra once reportedly quipped that Douglas could scare the ice out of a glass with his stare. Douglas didn't find it funny. The Oscar factor. The professional rivalry sharpened in 1953 when Sinatra won an Academy Award for From Here to Eternity. Sinatra had been at a low point in his career, written off by many in the industry, only to come roaring back with a performance that earned him Hollywood's highest prize. Douglas, who had already been nominated twice at that point for Champion 1949 and The Bad and the Beautiful 1952, was still waiting for a win. Watching a singer sweep into acting and snag an Oscar was a bitter pill. Though Douglas never publicly insulted Sinatra, industry gossip suggested he dismissed the victory as luck rather than talent. Sinatra, meanwhile, used his win to silence critics and prove he belonged on screen. The contrast between Sinatra's triumph and Douglas's simmering frustration only deepened their mutual dislike. Mob rumors and image. Sinatra's world was also tied to whispers of mob connections, high-stakes gambling, and backroom deals. Douglas had no patience for that side of Hollywood. He cultivated an image of integrity and professionalism, standing apart from scandal whenever possible. Sinatra, by contrast, thrived on the edge of controversy, and the public loved him for it. Douglas found the whole spectacle distasteful. Long-term coldness. The two men never reconciled. They didn't shout or brawl, but the tension was obvious whenever they crossed paths. Sinatra embodied everything Douglas rejected: charm without craft, success without suffering. Douglas represented everything Sinatra mocked: rigidity, joylessness, and a relentless need to prove himself. They moved in the same circles, but they lived in different worlds. Burt Lancaster. Best friends, best enemies. If Sinatra was a man from another universe, Burt Lancaster was cut from the same cloth as Douglas. Both were ambitious, both were fiercely competitive, and both wanted to be remembered as the greatest leading man of their time. That similarity created one of the most complex rivalries in Hollywood, a bond of respect wrapped in layers of envy. Their first spark, The two first starred together in I Walk Alone, 1947, a noir crime drama. Lancaster had already made a splash with The Killers, 1946, while Douglas was still carving out his niche. From the start, audiences noticed their chemistry. Lancaster's broad-shouldered athleticism contrasted perfectly with Douglas's wiry intensity. They looked like natural foils, and they knew it. The rivalry grows. As the 1950s rolled on, both actors became bona fide stars. Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1957, turned their rivalry into box office gold. Douglas played Doc Holliday, wiry and intense, while Lancaster took the role of Wyatt Earp, steady and authoritative. Critics raved about their on-screen pairing, but behind the scenes, the competition was fierce. Crew members recalled arguments about who would get the final close-up, who would walk through a door first, even who had the more flattering costume. Neither man wanted to appear weaker or secondary. Each scene was a contest for dominance, and while it could be exhausting for those around them, the friction gave their films an edge audiences could feel. Off-screen tensions. The rivalry wasn't confined to the set. Lancaster and Douglas constantly measured themselves against one another in the press. When Lancaster started producing his own films, Douglas quickly followed suit, founding Bryna Productions. When Douglas made headlines for hiring blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo, Lancaster positioned himself as a daring, independent-minded producer. Their careers mirrored each other like dueling reflections. Yet for all the bickering, there was genuine respect. They sometimes vacationed together with their families. Lancaster famously described Douglas as his best enemy, and Douglas admitted that Lancaster pushed him harder than anyone else. Their friendship was real, but it was never simple. The Oscar divide. One of the deepest wounds in their relationship came in 1960 when Lancaster won the Academy Award for Elmer Gantry. Douglas, nominated 3 times, had never won. Watching his rival claim the golden statue only deepened the envy. Douglas congratulated Lancaster publicly, but friends recalled his bitterness privately. He long believed he deserved recognition that never came. Later, years and legacy. Even into old age, the rivalry lingered. When Lancaster's health declined after a stroke in the 1990s, Douglas, by then in his late 70s, paid tribute to their strange bond. He described Lancaster as both a friend and a rival, someone who drove him to be better even as he drove him mad. Today, film historians view their rivalry as one of the most fascinating in Hollywood. Their clashes weren't destructive, they were productive. Together, they created some of the era's best films. But off-screen, their best enemy dynamic was a reminder that even in friendship, Douglas never let go of competition. Richard Harris, the wild card. Richard Harris, the Irish actor known for his booming voice and larger-than-life persona, was a very different creature from Kirk Douglas. Harris thrived on chaos. He was a drinker, a provocateur, and a man who wore his flaws openly. Douglas, by contrast, believed in discipline and self-control. Their values could not have been further apart, and whenever they found themselves in the same orbit, sparks flew. 2 different paths. By the time Harris broke through with This Sporting Life, 1963, Douglas was already an established Hollywood heavyweight. Harris's raw performance earned him critical acclaim, but it also came with a reputation. He was unpredictable, unfiltered, and sometimes downright unreliable. Directors loved his talent, but dreaded his behavior. Douglas, who prided himself on punctuality and preparation, saw in Harris the embodiment of wasted potential. Party encounters. Hollywood parties in the 1960s were legendary for mixing stars from all corners of the industry. Harris often arrived drunk, eager to stir the pot. Douglas, who avoided heavy drinking and valued composure, found such antics beneath him. Eyewitnesses recalled Harris poking fun at Douglas's seriousness, calling him the schoolmaster of Hollywood. Douglas never laughed. His cold glare reportedly silenced more than one room. Public perceptions. The press loved Harris's unpredictability, but Douglas quietly resented how much attention it earned him. Harris embodied the new Hollywood ideal of the rebellious actor, breaking rules and defying authority. Douglas came from an older generation where actors built careers by proving reliability. Their opposing reputations symbolized a clash between tradition and change. Mutual disdain. Though they never co-starred in a major film, the mutual disdain was no secret. Douglas called actors like Harris irresponsible, while Harris mocked Douglas's intensity as joyless. Their feud never made headlines, but among insiders it was understood. These two men respected neither each other's style nor their approach to life. Faye Dunaway, Old Guard versus New Hollywood. By the late 1960s, Douglas was a veteran star, a living symbol of Hollywood's golden age. Faye Dunaway was something else entirely, a rising star whose performances in Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, and Chinatown, 1974, redefined what a modern actress could be. She was talented, fearless, and utterly uncompromising. She was also labeled difficult, a reputation that would follow her throughout her career. The generational divide. Douglas had built his reputation on reliability. He showed up on time, knew his lines, and demanded the same from others. Dunaway, however, belonged to a new era where actors insisted on creative freedom, even if it meant clashing with directors or delaying production. Douglas saw her behavior as unprofessional. Dunaway saw Douglas as a relic of the old studio system that treated actors, especially women, as replaceable. On-set tension accounts from projects where Douglas and Dunaway worked together suggest constant friction. Douglas insisted on efficiency and control, while Dunaway pushed for retakes or resisted instructions she disagreed with. Crew members described a chilly atmosphere, with sharp words exchanged whenever either felt the other was undermining them. Public commentary. Douglas did something rare. He publicly criticized Dunaway, calling her difficult. Coming from a respected veteran, that label carried weight. For Dunaway, though, such criticism only hardened her reputation as Hollywood's most uncompromising star. She thrived on intensity, and she wasn't about to soften herself for Douglas, or anyone. Symbolism of the clash. Their feud wasn't just personal. It reflected the broader transformation of Hollywood in the 1970s. The old system of rigid professionalism was giving way to a more rebellious, artist-driven culture. Douglas represented the past. Dunaway represented the future. Their clash symbolized the tension between these two eras. John Wayne, the ideological opposite. Kirk Douglas's conflict with John Wayne was different from his other rivalries. It wasn't just about ego or work ethic. It was about politics, values, and the very soul of Hollywood during one of America's most divided eras. The blacklist era. In the late 1940s and 1950s, Hollywood was shaken by the blacklist, a period when suspected communists were barred from working in the industry. John Wayne, a staunch conservative and proud supporter of the House Un-American Activities Committee, believed the blacklist was necessary to protect American values. Douglas, on the other hand, opposed it. His boldest move came in 1960, when he credited blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo on Spartacus. The decision effectively broke the blacklist, restoring careers for dozens of writers. Wayne despised the move. He saw Douglas as undermining America, while Douglas saw Wayne as supporting injustice. Their ideological conflict was deep, and neither man backed down. On-set tensions in the war wagon. In 1967, Douglas and Wayne co-starred in The War Wagon. On screen, they were allies, trading quips and gunfire. Off-screen, the atmosphere was far less friendly. Crew members noted the lack of camaraderie. Douglas kept his distance, while Wayne treated him with icy professionalism. Their conversations rarely strayed beyond the script. Still, both men were professionals. They delivered the performances the film required, but everyone knew they were only tolerating each other for the sake of the project. Wayne and Douglas also clashed in interviews. Douglas once quipped that Wayne's politics belonged in the Stone Age. Wayne dismissed Douglas as a Hollywood liberal who didn't understand the real world. Their feud wasn't just personal, it was part of the broader cultural divide of the 1960s, with Wayne as the face of conservative America and Douglas as a symbol of liberal resistance. Legacy of the feud. The rivalry lasted until Wayne's death in 1979. Douglas remained proud of his decision to stand against the blacklist, often citing it as one of his greatest achievements. Wayne, even in his final years, never wavered in his belief that Douglas had made a mistake. Their feud became part of both men's legacies, a reflection of the larger battle over Hollywood's conscience. By the time Douglas was clashing with figures like Dunaway and Wayne, his reputation as Hollywood's most uncompromising star was already cemented, but the list of those who found him difficult didn't end there. Two more names, Marlon Brando and Robert Mitchum, would also stand on the opposite side of Douglas's personality, challenging his beliefs about acting and professionalism in ways that shaped his later years. Marlon Brando, the method versus the master of control. Marlon Brando was the actor who changed Hollywood forever. When A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, and On the Waterfront, 1954, hit theaters, audiences saw something they had never witnessed before. Brando's performances were raw, natural, unpolished in the best sense. He mumbled, slouched, and lived inside his characters rather than projecting them outward. He wasn't performing in the way audiences were used to. He was simply being. For Kirk Douglas, this was heresy. Douglas came from the stage tradition, where enunciation, clarity, and presence were everything. He worked tirelessly to master his craft. Every movement, every line delivery was carefully measured. Brando, by contrast, seemed to throw away all the rules Douglas had lived by. A philosophical divide. Douglas often criticized the method style Brando championed. He complained that Brando mumbled his way through scenes, undermining the clarity of the performance. To Douglas, Brando's approach wasn't artistry. It was laziness disguised as genius. Brando, for his part, was famously dismissive of actors he considered old-fashioned. He once said he had no patience for performers who were more concerned with posing than with truth. While he rarely named Douglas, his critiques of theatrical, over-the-top acting landed squarely in Douglas's territory. Professional envy. There was also envy at play. By the mid-1950s, Brando had become Hollywood's most acclaimed actor, winning Oscars and redefining the industry. Douglas, though enormously successful, had not yet secured his own Academy Award despite multiple nominations. Watching Brando collect accolades while dismissing the style Douglas had perfected was a bitter pill. Douglas's performance in Lust for Life, 1956, where he played Vincent van Gogh, was powerful and committed, but critics couldn't help but compare him unfavorably to Brando's naturalism. Douglas gave everything he had, but Brando's effortless authenticity stole the cultural moment. The broader shift. Their tension wasn't just personal, it represented a generational change. Brando embodied the new Hollywood, one that valued authenticity and emotion over polish. Douglas was the face of the old Hollywood, where professionalism and control were paramount. Their rivalry symbolized the passing of the torch, and Douglas hated what it implied. Legacy of their rivalry. Though they never engaged in a public war of words, their mutual disdain was widely understood. Douglas often positioned himself as the last defender of discipline in acting, while Brando basked in his role as a revolutionary. To historians, their conflict is one of the great symbolic feuds of the industry, the man who represented what Hollywood had been and the man who represented what it would become. Robert Mitchum, the rebel and the perfectionist. If Brando infuriated Douglas by representing a new philosophy of acting, Robert Mitchum drove him mad by not caring at all. Mitchum was the anti-star, laconic, rebellious, and often dismissive of Hollywood itself. He famously joked that he had two styles of acting, on a horse and off a horse. To Douglas, who lived for the craft. This kind of irreverence was unforgivable. A study in contrasts. Douglas was obsessive. He studied scripts line by line, rehearsed tirelessly, and carried himself with an almost military precision. Mitchum was the opposite. He often improvised, shrugged off preparation, and approached roles with a casualness that scandalized more disciplined actors. To some, Mitchum's nonchalance was charming. To Douglas, it was an insult. He believed acting was sacred, that it demanded seriousness and respect. Watching Mitchum treat it like a paycheck must have felt like watching someone desecrate a temple. On-set reputation. Though Douglas and Mitchum didn't share many starring roles, their reputations often collided in industry circles. Producers knew better than to put them together for long. Douglas couldn't stand Mitchum's lack of discipline, and Mitchum had no patience for Douglas's intensity. Mitchum was also known for mocking colleagues behind their backs. While there's no record of him publicly attacking Douglas, his wry jokes about actors who try too hard were widely understood to include him. Douglas, who never tolerated mockery, returned the favor by dismissing Mitchum as lazy. The Hollywood archetypes. Their conflict also symbolized two archetypes of Hollywood. Douglas was the perfectionist, the striver who demanded everything from himself and others. Mitchum was the rebel, the man who refused to let the industry define him. In another world, they might have complemented each other. In reality, they represented philosophies too far apart to ever coexist. Aftermath. In later years, Douglas spoke about actors who wasted their potential, and Mitchum was often included in those critiques. Mitchum characteristically didn't care. His indifference was his brand, and he never apologized for it. Their cold disdain remained until the end of their careers. Looking back on Kirk Douglas's career, it's clear that conflict was as much a part of his story as triumph. He clashed with Sinatra, dismissing him as a lightweight coasting on charm. He competed fiercely with Burt Lancaster, his best enemy whose success mirrored his own. He bristled at Richard Harris's chaos, recoiled from Faye Dunaway's volatility, and locked horns with John Wayne over politics. He resented Marlon Brando's revolution and sneered at Robert Mitchum's indifference. Why did Douglas make so many enemies? The answer lies in his personality. He was uncompromising. He demanded discipline, not only from himself, but from everyone around him. He couldn't stand actors who didn't take the craft as seriously as he did, and he wasn't afraid to say so. In an industry built on fragile egos, that made him a lightning rod for conflict. Yet these rivalries also defined his greatness. Competing with Lancaster pushed him to higher levels. Standing against Wayne allowed him to take moral stances that shaped history, such as breaking the blacklist with Spartacus. Resisting Brando's revolution gave him a clear identity as the last of the old-school titans. Even his disdain for Mitchum highlighted his unwavering commitment to acting as a calling, not just a job. Kirk Douglas's legacy is complicated. He wasn't universally loved, but he was universally respected. His career wasn't built on charm, but on determination. And while his rivalries sometimes overshadowed his friendships, they also made him unforgettable. In the end, Douglas's story is the story of Hollywood itself, a world of larger-than-life personalities, clashing egos, and unyielding ambition. He fought battles on screen and off, and whether you admired him or disliked him, you couldn't ignore him. That, perhaps more than anything, is what made Kirk Douglas a legend. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the rivalries of Kirk Douglas and old Hollywood, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which feud surprised you the most? And of course, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we've got plenty more stories from Hollywood's golden age coming your way.